First, I want to start with the distinction that you've taught me now, which is there's the high tech that's represented by the so-called Made in China 2025, and there's artificial intelligence. And from the Chinese government's point of view, those are somewhat separate initiatives.
Yeah, there are two basically papers written by the State Council outlining the importance of two different sets of technologies. And my expertise is in the artificial intelligence, so I'm more familiar with that plan.
Of course, you have your PhD, actually, in artificial intelligence in part. But let's talk about the broader technology before we turn to artificial intelligence again, because you did work for Google, and you've worked for Microsoft, you've worked for these enterprises. What is it based, the conflict here? Is it a matter of the United States perhaps fairly saying there are some unfair practices from the Chinese, or is it a matter of the United States not wanting the Chinese to pass them by, to get the advantage over them?
I think it's an academic argument because in reality, the Chinese ecosystem has now been fully built with Chinese apps for e-commerce and search and apps, and even apps that are don't even exist in the U.S. So there are two parallel ecosystems, and in my book I call them parallel universe. So in practice, an American company in mobile software AI will not be able to succeed in China, nor would a Chinese company in America. So it's two different pillars at this point.
So they're two different pillars, but they rub up against each other every once in a while. And we have the CFIUS review in the Treasury Department. We've had several deals now stopped. If they really are parallel, is there any way to slow the Chinese down, if that in fact is the U.S. government goal? Is there any way to slow them down through CFIUS? Am I saying you can't invest in, can't take interest in U.S. tech companies?
Well, obviously there are other domains like PC and phone where the two countries and their technologies are much more entangled. But in our area, AI and mobile, I think they're two parallel pillars, and I don't think any policy would effectively change anything.
So if there are two parallel pillars with respect to artificial intelligence specifically, if it is a race, because we like to talk about races and horses in the race, who's ahead?
Well, U.S. is ahead in research in basic technologies. China is faster in implementation, so probably will create greater value out of the technologies. But it's really not a zero-sum game because the Chinese VCs like us are funding Chinese companies and selling to Chinese users, and the Americans are doing the same on a separate pillar. So both can be very successful. They're not yet competing for the same customer.
There's a belief, and I want you to tell us whether it's true or it's a myth in the United States. Frankly, this goes back to Japan, that basically Japan and now China are able to take what the United States invents and then replicate it and make it less expensive and make it faster. But they are not really capable of innovating, of creating the invention to begin with. Is that true or false today?
I think it's false. Because if I show you my apps on my phone, you'll be shocked how great they are. In China, there is no cash anymore. The innovation has taken to a stage where everyone just pays each other through their phones. There are now, robotic fast food restaurants we invested in, robotic pastry shops, and the access to the internet to buy things for food delivery, shared bicycle. China is very innovative now, and these apps don't even exist in the U.S.
Well, it's interesting. They've taken it much farther, much faster. But if I were to take two apps, like a payment app, we have payment apps in the United States as well. You have Apple Pay, you have other things. If I were able, and I'm not, to take those apart, would I see that they're entirely different, that they were created in entirely different ways? Or to what extent may President Trump have a point that, in fact, the Chinese have benefited from getting access to some of the intellectual property created in the United States and then used it in very clever ways?
Okay, so first, if we take the payment Chinese app versus the American app, the Chinese app is way ahead because it is frictionless, no commission, anyone can pay anyone, and micropayment capable, 15 cents per transaction, and nothing's charged, unlike the credit cards or even Apple Pay has credit cards behind it. On your other comment, I think we have to carefully separate IP infringement from who came up with the idea. Actually, Americans came up with the first electronic payment, but China built a better product. And there is no infringement on the IP in this case.
Well, let me just probe this a little bit, because President Trump and others, European entities, tell us that, in fact, China has gotten an advantage by requiring companies that come to China to license intellectual property, give access to intellectual property that then could be copied. Is that true or false?
Well, I can tell you in our space, mobile, software, and AI, that is false. In other spaces, I'm not so familiar.
Yeah, fascinating. Now, you call them as two different pillars. Will they remain two separate pillars? I mean, if in fact China is ahead or were to come ahead on high tech, and let's include AI in that, could those companies come back and compete in the United States, in Western Europe, and the rest of the world and beat U.S. companies, for example?
I think that's unlikely. I think U.S. will remain very, very strong in English-speaking countries, Europe, and possibly Japan. And China is starting to make inroads into Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. But just early. But playing out over time, probably the two superpowers, that's why I named the book AI Superpowers, the world will be really dominated by two superpowers.
Well, let's assume that there are two superpowers, and let's even assume they don't compete with each other. Tell us what it might mean for the ordinary person, whether they're in China or whether they're in the United States or in Western Europe. I mean, for example, what are the ramifications of artificial intelligence, which we're told will revolutionize our lives?
Yes.
On work, on employment.
Yeah.
What jobs will we have?
Well, that is the same issue facing everybody on Earth, because AI, the AI that works today is essentially this prodigy that can do one task extremely well, better than people, and almost marginally free because it's just software running. So routine jobs, both blue-collar and white-collar routine jobs, are going to be displaced by AI over the next 15 years. And that's going to cause problems for China, US, Europe, everybody.
Well, in this new world, you simply won't need as many workers, will you? It's not like an assembly line.
You won't need as many workers for the current jobs. The challenge for humanity is, can we create enough other jobs to absorb the people coming off the current job?